Вже 10, пропоную розпочинати.
It's 10 o'clock. I suggest we start. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, partners, to join us today for the presentation of the UN policy paper on social protection in Ukraine, Patients in Focus. Let me start with a couple of technical issues. Well, first, please mute yourself during the entire event and only unmute yourself if you need to speak. There is simultaneous interpretation provided during our event, so if you need to choose the language, please go below. There is the selection of the languages option. If you don't need interpretation, just use the original. At the end, we will have time for questions and answers, so please keep your questions and comments until the end, or write them in the chat, and we will get back to them at the end. We also have a live stream for the general public. We are going to monitor the comments at those live streams, and our online viewers can also ask questions. Thank you very much, and I suggest we start. And I would like to give the floor to the Ms. Osant Lubrani, UN Resident Coordinator in Ukraine.
Thank you, Katerina. Good morning, everyone.
Дякую, Катерино. Доброго ранку.
I'm just correcting so that I don't hear myself translated into Ukrainian. Okay, so I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this online presentation of the UN policy paper on social protection, which is an analytic document that was created by all of us from the UN, all of the UN agencies, funds and programs in Ukraine. And the aim is to present our common UN position on social protection issues and also offer our recommendations on how to improve the social protection systems. I'm very honored that we are joined by very high-level guests from the government of Ukraine, and Minister Lazebna in particular, the Minister of Social Affairs, but also other members from government, but also from our UN headquarters. And we have representatives also of civil society and academia and many experts to discuss pension and social protection reform. Now, I think this event is particularly timing because I think with the COVID pandemic, social protection systems are very central to an effective response that focuses on the most vulnerable populations, ensures their access to basic services. It can help to preserve livelihoods, and it can also be a key to relaunching the economy. Now, our presentation today, I'm very proud, is organized within the Hernan Santa Cruz Initiative. This is a series of worldwide dialogues organized by the UN that aim to raise awareness and stimulate discussion that can help to strengthen realization of economic, social, and cultural rights. And they draw on the vision and the mission of Hernan Santa Cruz, who was a Chilean delegate to the UN and one of the authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Globally, Ukraine is only the second country to organize a dialogue within this framework, within this series, focusing on the right to social security, and in particular, with focus on the pension reform. And I'm very pleased towards later on we'll have an opportunity today to hear the video recorded remarks also from Maximiliano Santa Cruz, who is the grandchild of Hernan Santa Cruz. So this is a very good way to launch a policy paper that my hope is will spark a dialogue and hopefully even a wider national debate on social protection and specifically pension reform. So if you will allow me just a few words on why do we consider social protection, in particular adequate pensions, such an important and very timely issue to discuss. So social protection is a human right, and it contributes to social and economic development. We know that in countries where social protection systems have a wide population coverage that is adequate and affordable levels, that is a key for sustainable development and prosperity of the entire country. The 2030 agenda, for this reason, commits all governments to implement social protection systems and floors to achieve substantial coverage for all, and especially the poor and the vulnerable. And it really is, we know, a true accelerator across all of the SDGs, but I would highlight in particular the SDG 1, eradication of poverty, SDG 3, maintaining health and well-being, fostering gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, which is SDG 5, and of course addressing inequalities, which is SDG 10. And it really can help to maintain a stable, productive, employable human capital that is the basis for sustainable economic growth. Now, our policy paper points to significant avenues for improving Ukraine's social protection systems, in particularly in these COVID pandemic times, and because we've seen what the limitations are of the existing security system. The pandemic has in some ways exposed them. For example, workers in the informal economy have suffered such difficulties and losses, and they fall out of coverage of the existing schemes. At the same time, I want to highlight that the COVID-19 pandemic really provides an opportunity to focus on this and build a better, more comprehensive social protection system, increase access, coverage, better targeting to those who are most in need and to regions that are most in need and that have high levels of unemployment and poverty, as a stabilizer in the countries in this crisis. During the previous months, the UN has been in discussions with the government on the recently adopted National Economic Strategy 2030 that places quite a strong emphasis on the long-discussed topic of pension reform. And that is why we decided to focus today's discussions on pensions, because social benefits is quite a wide topic. And we thought we should focus and contribute our expertise, our perspectives, and our recommendations, which draw on global good practice and lessons learned that can inform the planned national reforms ahead. Now, pensioners are one of the most vulnerable groups in Ukraine. They make up to 27% of the population. So, and out of the 11 million pensioners, over 80% receive pensions that are below subsistence budget. Also, 20% of pensioners, which makes about 2 million people, have disabilities and require additional assistance. I want to point out that there's a big group of pensioners who live in areas not under government control in the conflict-affected eastern Ukraine, and they have significant and specific problems accessing their pensions because they need to travel to the government-controlled areas to access them. And by 2019, some 600,000 pensioners that fall into this category have lost access to their pensions due to movement restrictions and very complex administrative requirements. And in 2020, a further 270 such residents have not been able to make their pension withdrawals in the government-controlled areas because of even more restrictions on crossing the line due to the COVID pandemic. And for these people, these pensions are absolutely vital to sustaining the life, their daily life, and it's also important for the connectivity and social cohesion and for the reintegration agenda. Now, looking at the country as a whole, it's also important to note that Ukraine will face a significant economic cost due to the demographic decline. The population in Ukraine is projected to fall by 20% by 2050, and with a significant increase in the plus 65 age population. And the expected sharp increase in the age dependency ratio puts pension system sustainability at a risk. And so, as we talk about pension reform, we also need to remember that labor policies also need to significantly improve to invest in lifelong learning and also continuous improvement of meaningful employment opportunities. All these considerations call for specific attention as well as public discussions on the reforms and how to make the new system really work well, drawing on global experience and good practice. So this, finally, I want to say this launch today presents one of several UN events, and our overall aim is to ignite constructive debate and then promote policy actions that are in line with Ukraine's commitments to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm very happy to pass the floor to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Michelle Bachelet, for her pre-recorded opening remarks. This will be followed by a video message from Director General of the ILO, Mr. Guy Ryder. And after these videos, we will move forward to the panel discussions with our distinguished invited guests. And I'm so pleased and honored and thankful that this panel will be moderated by the renowned journalist Andrei Kulikov. And thank you so much, Andrei. So after the video, I will hand it's over to you to let us have a fruitful dialogue. Thank you very much.
Перепрошую, одну хвилинку. Зараз будемо запускати відео.
I'm sorry, just a minute, and soon we are going to launch the video.
Перепрошую, чи чутно відео?
Can you hear the video?
No, the video is not heard. Sorry.
There is no sound, Katerina. In English, there is no sound.
There should not be a sound because the video itself is in English. Перепрошую, в нас невеличкі технічні незручності.
Sorry, we have some minor technical issues. To be able to hear video,
Вимкнути переклад зовсім.
I ask you to switch off the interpretation, so it's going to be video in English with subtitles in Ukrainian. Sorry, again, let's relaunch the video.
Greeting. Greetings to all of you. I am glad to have this opportunity to contribute to discussions about reform of the social protection system, which could bring many opportunities for change and progress for the people of Ukraine. Social protection is a fundamental human right and essential tool for reducing poverty. It is embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, thanks to Hernan Santa Cruz, a Chilean diplomat, one of the drafters of the Universal Declaration. Today's event is named after his groundbreaking vision of a human rights agenda that is grounded in people's right to live free of deprivation as well as from fear. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that the right to social protection is crucial to life in dignity anywhere in the world. Ukraine, like other states, is grappling with the severe consequences of the pandemic, from the heavy toll of death and suffering to overcharged health systems, economic contraction, and job losses. I understand that 6.3 million more people fell into poverty in 2020. In my view, taking immediate steps to build a better, more comprehensive social protection system is crucial to providing immediate, life-changing assistance and to longer-term recovery from the crisis. Pension reform will be a key part of this work. Older people are more than a quarter of Ukraine's population. 2/3 of those older people are women. According to the State Pension Fund, 77% of Ukraine's pensioners receive income that is less than the minimum subsistence level. Poverty among older women is even more severe. Women's pensions are on average 30% below those of men. With Ukraine continuing to age more in the coming years, reform now is important and timely. Pension should support a decent income and reflect people's growing need for assistance as they age. We know from experience in other countries that this can enable older people to maintain their independence and help them stay out of institutional care. Whether in cash or in kind, benefits must be adequate in amount and duration to ensure everyone has the right to family protection, an adequate standard of living, and adequate access to healthcare. During the pandemic, Ukraine has increased its unemployment benefit, and I hope this sound move can become the standard practice. I also encourage the authorities to regularly monitor whether pensions are sufficient to ensure the beneficiaries can afford basic goods and services. To protect everyone, it is important to strike a balance between contributory and non-contributory pension schemes. Many women, freelance workers, workers in the informal economy, and marginalized people who suffer from discrimination may not have been in a position to contribute formally to the social protection system, but they have economic and social rights, as all of us do. Older women are especially at risk. They live longer, and traditional stereotypes and lifelong unpaid care work have often impeded their access to formal employment, decent wages, and contributory social security systems. Pension systems that take into account women's unequal care work, including care for children, can correct this imbalance and ensure that caring for others does not endanger women's human rights. But that does not mean these disproportionate burdens are okay. In the context of COVID-19, we have seen women's unpaid care work increasing enormously as they care for sick and older relatives and look after children who have been at home all day. Yes, we absolutely need gender-responsive social protection systems, but we also need far-reaching awareness-raising campaigns to promote shared family responsibility for work in the home. We need to reduce the heavy burden of unpaid care work which women carry all their lives, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world. However, there is a specific issue in Ukraine that needs to be addressed. In 2019, some 600,000 pensioners in non-government controlled areas lost access to their pensions due to restrictions of movement across the line of contact, as well as complex administrative requirements. A further 270,000 have been unable to access their pension inside the government control area. It is essential that all the people who are internally displaced or whose lives have been otherwise impacted by the conflict be able to access the pensions which are their rights. The current draft legislation that delinks access to pensions from the registration of internally displaced people is a very important step forward for them and for the country as a whole. Ukraine's reformed pension system can become universal, sensitive to age and sex, and accessible and sustainable for present and future generations. By helping to analyze gaps in coverage, human rights analysis can help reforms address the multiple dimensions of discrimination and inequality that generate poverty, and can provide practical guidance to make people and their well-being the priority. The UN policy paper on social protection, which is being issued today, is one such tool. I also encourage a broad national debate on these topics, with broad participation by pensioners, trade unions, social movements, and women's groups. As head of state and government in Chile, I was very engaged in the work of advancing the principle of solidarity, including with respect to all the women and men. I know this may not always be an easy task, to uphold the right to social protection for all older women and men, including internally displaced people and those who live in conflict-affected areas. Ukraine will have to mobilize resources. This may involve progressive taxation measures, strengthening the capacity to collect taxes, fighting tax evasion and other forms of abuse, and tackling corruption. International cooperation and assistance could be of help. But it is my personal experience, as well as the repeated experience of my office, that these reforms will assist in the massive reduction of poverty and inequalities and strengthen social cohesion and economic resilience. So I wish you a productive day of discussions to contribute to successful reform.
І тепер після цього я запущу
Now let me please launch the video message of the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Guy Ryder.
Representatives of the government of Ukraine, UN Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator, colleagues from the UN sister agencies, participants in the launch of the UN position paper. It's been just over 1 year since the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and this unprecedented crisis has completely changed our world. It's changed our lives and the way that we work. And as often happens in a crisis, the most vulnerable are the ones who suffer the most. As a result, the pandemic has deepened the profound inequalities that already existed in the world of work. To make sure we leave no one behind, we must extend and strengthen social protection systems. According to our estimates, the temporary extension of social protection measures during the crisis have supported the livelihoods of nearly 645 million people around the world. It's a lot, but it's not enough. Because to be really effective, social protection schemes need to remain in place and at scale. It's the only way that we can avert a massive surge in unemployment and the poverty caused when people fall out of the world of work. In Ukraine, the social security system has helped the workers affected by the pandemic. Health protection and unemployment and sickness benefits have protected the most vulnerable. And this has meant less misery for many people. Ukraine has thus kept its commitments under the ILO Social Security Minimum Standards Convention, number 102, that it ratified in 2016. However, there is still much to be done. The crisis has magnified the challenges that need to be tackled. Building a universal and comprehensive social protection system should be at the heart of Ukraine's recovery strategy. The social security system should promote the transition towards formal employment of the growing number of workers in the informal economy. And it also needs to adequately protect all those in non-standard forms of employment. And this includes platform workers, as well as migrant workers, and those living in non-government controlled areas. Ukraine is now facing a crucial choice in deciding the future of its pension system. To create a solid pension system, all key stakeholders, the government, trade unions, and employers must be willing to negotiate. When tough decisions need to be taken, social dialogue is the best way to find legitimate solutions and the best possible compromises. It offers the possibility to take into account the points of view from all sectors of society. Successful reforms also need solid foundations, and this means consolidating existing protection mechanisms before establishing new ones, making sure that reforms are anchored in core social protection principles, and guaranteeing income security for workers now and in the future. The COVID-19 crisis is not yet over. There's still a long road ahead. But there is a map. International labour standards can provide clear guidance on how to consolidate a better system. And at the ILO, we will support all of your efforts to achieve comprehensive and sustainable social protection for all. We'll be there every step on the way to make sure that Ukraine can build a better future for all of its citizens.
Дякую. Ще раз перепрошую за
Thank you again. Sorry for some minor technical issues. Please turn on now the interpretation. Right, thank you. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Marina Lazebna, the Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine. She is with us today. She agreed to take part in our event. So, Ms. Minister, the floor is yours. The government of Ukraine approach to social protection and planned pension reform priorities ahead. That's the name of the speech.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги. Я рада всіх бачити. Я хочу щиро подякувати пані Осмат Лубрані за організацію, за підтримку і всі, до речі, всім нашим партнерам, міжнародним інституціям, агентствам ООН за системну допомогу України у питаннях утвердження миру, подолання бідності, нерівності, соціального захисту людей, які постраждали внаслідок збройної агресії Росії, запровадження кращих практик, світових практик, дотримання соціальних прав людей і, безумовно, це створення міцної основи соціального діалогу та зайнятості. Сьогодні у нас з вами дуже важлива розмова, тому що ми будемо говорити про те, а як розбудувати країну, у якій люди хочуть жити і залишатися. Але для цього ми маємо чесно дати відповіді на декілька питань. Перше, ми повинні визначити відправну точку, який стан справ сьогодні в Україні, оцінити як демографічні, так і економічні зміни та виклики, які нас очікують, і відповідно сформувати стратегію, яка з урахуванням цих змін приведе нас до бажаного результату. Минулий рік і загроза COVID-19 для всього світу стала іспитом на людяність, солідарство та братерство. Ми всі працювали у нових умовах, відповідали на нові виклики, пов'язані з пандемією, карантинними обмеженнями і потребами у захисті людей. Досвіду реагування на подібні загрози у нас не було, і тому рішення приходилося приймати надоперативно. Наше міністерство від самого початку, як тільки ми оголосили повний локдаун в країні, ми напрацювало карту домогосподарств для того, щоб визначити ті цільові групи, які потребують адресної допомоги і які найбільше опинилися у скрутній ситуації під час пандемії. В першу чергу ми підтримали пенсіонерів і малозабезпечених. Ми підвищували мінімальну зарплату і збільшували доплати медикам. Ми побачили, що у 50% наших домогосподарств проживає хоча б один пенсіонер, і підтримуючи пенсіонерів, ми підтримуємо доходи домогосподарства. Тому запустили комплексну програму підвищення пенсій. Ми спростили доступ до усіх соціальних
We simplify the access to all the programs of support. We increase the salaries. We understood that people are working remotely, children are studying remotely, the consumption is growing. We needed to take that into account. The priority was the support to business and retaining jobs to avoid massive downsizing. We provided preferences to businesses in terms of the taxes. We introduced the benefits for partial losses of jobs. It was the most important thing for us to have to ensure that people have jobs, so that no one here understands and feels this influence from the COVID. We decided that all those periods of COVID pandemic restrictions, they will be taken into account for the future pensions, so that those terms will be included in the total employment of people. So that it does, so that their pension, their future pensions, do not get decreased. That was kind of emergency support to people, and those measures helped to improve the situation. At the beginning of the year, we saw those forecasts, how fast the level of poverty can grow in Ukraine, but it didn't happen. And now we have the economic overview of the World Bank experts, and they say that the influence of COVID-19 on the level of poverty was relatively average, and the experts believe that Ukraine's support did help to compensate on the job losses, and the poverty level in Ukraine was increased in 2020 only by 0.5%. According to their regular estimations. We are going to continue to fight poverty, to take measures to eradicate poverty, and to help people improve their level of living. Our Ukrainian experts also have assessed the poverty level over 5 years. We had parliamentary hearings, and they also overviewed the level of poverty and those programs focused to fight poverty. And indeed, the level of poverty remains high, but still we are taking actions to decrease it. Along with the pandemic challenges, Ukrainians also have this burden of fighting the aggression of the Russian Federation. They occupied 7% of our territory that used to generate about 14% of our GDP. For our government, the increase of the level of living is a strategic goal, and any reform that's being launched or continues in Ukraine focuses on the welfare of people. Yesterday, at the meeting of the cabinet, we adopted the strategy of human development that we already submitted to the president of Ukraine. That's going to be reviewed at the National Security and Defense Council and approved by the president. This is a comprehensive document developed by the Ministry of Social Policy, other ministries, experts, general public, and it's very much important for me to know that this strategy is like a mirror of another important document, the Sustainable Development Goals approved at UN Summit back in 2015. So all those our strategies are reflect all those benchmarks and achievements undertaken by Ukraine within the Sustainable Development Goals. We have those answers to the questions of science, education, physical culture, ensuring the rights of men and women, gender equality, and other issues. In this context, I want to focus on the following fact. We have already the roadmap for the implementation of 5 national projects that must create the conditions for the development of social relationships.
The first is subsistence level reform, the stable social insurance, family is another priority. We want every community to have good quality services. And our 5th project and priority, this is digitalization of social sphere. Yesterday at our session, we have approved the regulation that will allow us create a single social registry that will consolidate the information of the beneficiaries of all social services. So this process will be transparent and controlled. There will be no place for corruption because all processes of social sphere will be automated, and a human being, a person, which is the most important, will be able to get social services easily and without any obstructions. Another thing I wanted to point out today is in order to build long-term policy, we have to take into account the changes that are happening in Ukraine and worldwide. One of the challenges we are facing today is and it has effect on the social policy is that the world is getting older. The proportion of people, the elderly people, is getting bigger worldwide, and Ukraine is not an exception. So we also have poor demographic situation. So we are the aging country. In 2050, according to projections, the proportion of people older than 65 years will be 33%. Knowing that there is no other way out but rebuild our social relations. I will mention a few criteria, a few things we are striving for. Number one, every senior person has to have adequate income in order to have good life. Second, they have to have access to good quality healthcare services. Every senior citizen has to have access to take part in society life and socializing. Every senior person has to have dignified attitude towards themselves from society and from people around them. In order to provide dignified conditions of life, we need good economy, we need formal employment, we need decent competitive salaries, and we need taxes to be paid timely. And as Mr. Guy Ryder pointed out, it can only be achieved due to good compromise with our partners. Another thing I wanted to mention is that answering questions today, I mean, the question that I had mentioned earlier in my presentation, what sort of country are we trying to build? Let me answer this question. People need jobs. They need dignity jobs, they need social security, they need competitive salary, and they need equality in their rights and opportunities. I'm happy that United Nations prepared and presented this policy paper. There are certain benchmarks, there are certain criteria and certain things we need to take into account. I'm grateful to our partners from UN, and we are ready for the dialogue and discussion so that we can move together in the same direction towards meeting our goals. And our goal is to improve the livelihood of our people. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Marina Lazebna. Now we are ready to start panel discussion. So this will be about the key aspects to take under consideration when reforming the pension system in Ukraine. So I'm giving the floor over to the moderator, Mr. Andriy Kulikov. Andriy, over to you. Dear colleagues, I have had quite an experience in moderating, but every time I am surprised how important it is to keep the timing. So I'm impressed that the opening remarks, both video messages and the presentation of Marina Lazebna, so that was really, really nice and timely. But we've got 1 hour, give or take. Therefore, we will be very strict on timing. And let's agree, you have no more than 8 minutes in order to make your statement, so that we have a chance to respond to what others said and answer any questions that might arise. So you can write your questions in our chat. You can also post them in our social networks channels. We will definitely answer all the questions and take into account all your feedback and the comments. Ms. Osnat Lubrani, in her opening remarks, actually set the atmosphere, proper atmosphere of our work and pace of our work. And she mentioned the dignified system of pension security. And this is one of the prerequisites for prospering of the economy of every country, including Ukraine. And I believe that this is one of the key prerequisites for sustainable democracy in society, because it allows people, the seniors, the elderly people, to be active members of social and political life of the country. Since our speakers who started the discussion saved us a few minutes, which I'm grateful for, then we will have extra 30 seconds for each speaker who wants to make a statement. So that'll be 8 minutes and 30 seconds. But I have a question for you. And each question is very important, but my question is, please make sure you keep the time. Our discussion is about the key aspects to take under consideration when reforming the pension system. What is the key aspect that comes to your mind first? 30 seconds for that. Alexander Shubin, who is the deputy head of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear fellow participants. I'm grateful to be a member of this discussion. I think that the key question that we have to address, talking about pension system, this is trust and fairness, fair attitude. They are very similar, they are synonyms, but this is what people expect when they are getting older. Thank you, Alexander. Yes, you're right that those two words are very close in its meaning. Kum Markov, Social Protection Policy Specialist, Social Protection Department, ILO, Geneva. Go ahead.
Thank you, Andrei. just to go in the same sense as Alexander before me, I think what is generating this trust is again going back to the core principles of social protection, securing good financial, fiscal, and economic sustainability for the system, for the pension system, with due regard to equity and social justice. This is key. This is basically the core. Without this, you cannot make a reform. You cannot have a sustainable system functioning.
Дуже дякую. І обговорення ще не почалося, а вже
Thank you very much. The discussion hasn't started yet, but we already have some response to what has been mentioned. Halina Tretyakova, head of Verkhovna Rada Committee on Social Policy and Protection of Veterans' Rights. So what comes to your mind when we are talking about key aspects that need to be taken into consideration when reforming the pension system?
Пані Галино.
Halina, are you with us? Halina is not with us, unfortunately, so she's going to join us shortly. It's just important to know that she will join us shortly. In that case, Elina Shishkina, Advocacy Coordinator, Non-Governmental Organization, Right to Protection. Good morning, dear participants. I agree with previous speakers. I'm really honored to be a member of this discussion. The first thing that comes to my mind, this is non-discrimination, and this is respect to dignity of all seniors and all pensioners, irrespective of the fact whether these are the pensioners who live on non-government controlled territories or government controlled territories. These are the seniors, and they are really important. Dignity matters, and dignity has to be the solid foundation, and the good pension is the right of every pensioner in Ukraine. Thank you, Irina. Stefania Tripodi, Human Rights Officer, OHCHR Geneva. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andriy. I would like to echo what the other speakers have already said, that one of the main guiding principles should be really to leave no one behind. And so to really operationalize what non-discrimination means into a pension system, looking after those, for example, who have not been able to contribute on an equal basis with others, like women, and as the High Commissioner has pointed out, that often their unequal burden of unpaid care lead them to having less possibilities to contribute to the social protection system.
Дякую, Стефанія. І слово повертається.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now we go back to Marina Lazebna. 30 seconds, Marina. I understand that on daily basis, you have to deal with all those key aspects. If there are non-key aspects, then you probably have to deal with them as well. But things that come to your mind first when we are talking about these aspects. Yes, you are right. I've been working on it for a year, and I even have my recipe for success. Any system is going to work once there is trust of people, and secondly, once we all get together, have consolidated vision, and do their homework. So each and every person has to do their homework in the area of their responsibility. Only then we will have the system people will trust. I really love that she doesn't use conditional sentences with if, but she uses conditional time clauses with when. So we will fulfill our obligations and commitments when everybody does the homework. Today is just the start and impetus of this discussion. Now we've got 8 minutes per presenter. If you use fewer than 8 minutes, we will be grateful. Then we will have more time for questions and answers and discussion. And once you reach minute 7, I will send you a reminder that there is 1 minute left. The first presenter will be Ms. Marina Lazebna, Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine. I would really appreciate if she takes into account the fact that recently we have approved economic social strategies when we are talking about the second level of pension reform and pension system, and that is the development of the capital market. And the purpose is to achieve 20% of GDP in terms of the capital of private pensions. How realistic is this ambition, especially taking into account higher turnover in economic context, and of course negative consequences of COVID pandemic, and what tools the ministry has and what tools they are going to use in order to protect pension contributions from inflation, which is 5% at the moment. Go ahead, Marina. Thank you, Andriy. Thank you, dear colleagues. I have quite a comprehensive presentation report because I've been working on it, I've been dreaming about it, and I want to build a system which is balanced and comprehensive. I have outlined a few problems, because knowing the problems, you know, you probably can come to solution. In 2003, we all know that certain laws were enacted, and we have a three-level pension system. The first one is pay-as-you-go pension system. Second is contributory pension, which hasn't been implemented, and voluntary pension system, which is working, but unfortunately, due to inadequate attention of government to this system, we know that this system is used only by 9% of insured people. This is 1 million, speaking in terms of figures. And this is, of course, inadequate attention of the government towards this problem. In the program, in policy paper, there was a thesis that contributory policy, contributory pension does not replace pay-as-you-go pension system. It balances, it helps to balance, because pay-as-you-go pension system does not have financial leverage, and it affects demographic indexes. That's why both systems, when combined together, can produce good effect. What do we have in pay-as-you-go pension system? We have inadequate sources of funding. We all know that. We know that only 13 million of people pay taxes to support 11 million of pensioners. Back in 2016, we couldn't answer the question whether the decision taken was right. So there was the decision taken to reduce the social security tax twice. We thought that that will contribute to unofficial employment. It didn't happen. But what we have today, that we have under-financed social services, there is lack of resources, and we have fewer people who get jobs, and we have unemployment problem. So when social security tax was reduced, we thought that this resource will be directed towards the contributory pension system, and people might make some savings for the future. It didn't happen, unfortunately. The pension is very low, and this relates to the issue of fairness and fair attitude and trust. Almost 60% of our pensioners get pension which is smaller than subsistence level, smaller than 3,000 hryvnias. And we know that we have lower coefficient of replacement of pensions and salary. So now it's 36%, used to be 54%. When you asked about the national strategy until 2030, I believe that we need to increase this coefficient. People who are ready to retire, they have to be interested in good, formal, official salary, good social perks and benefits, so that they can make proper savings for the pension age. I am not talking about the capital here. I'm talking about people, about their pension and its ratio towards its salary, official salary. Another thing, it's fair attitude. And it's very painful and it hurts, because if there is a huge gap, 10 times gap between minimum pension and the maximum pension, of course it hurts. Of course people are unhappy. And also, there were some changes in terms of qualifying minimum insurance period. So we have made indexation, and it was difficult to explain why some people were covered by indexation of the pensions, others were excluded. So these issues need to be addressed. Today, we are trying to manage this pay-as-you-go pension system and prioritize it. We've got a few legislative initiatives. They are already under consideration. The first is like fair calculation of subsistence level, so that minimum social guarantees in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel here. The Constitution says if social guarantees allow people to have decent life, then we need to make sure we implement the reform of subsistence level and indexation, because all people who are working, so they are entitled to decent life. We've got a few initiatives. They are included into UN policy papers. So this is what we want to cover. We want to cover with the social security those people who are receiving their minimum salary and they cannot pay taxes in minimum amount. We cannot deprive people of social guarantees only because they are getting smaller salaries. Another issue is about people who have only 15 years of work experience. If a person had worked for 14 years and 9 months, they also need support, and we need to create a new package of social initiatives and social services. And of course, we need to create a reasonable ratio between minimum and maximum pension.
I can add more, but it's more related to the pension age. You have that issue on the policy paper. I'll admit that. I just want to focus on the Convention 102 of the International Labour Organization ratified in Ukraine. I heard the High Rider that Ukraine implemented its obligations, but in fact we are going to improve even more, and we are preparing a draft law for that. And I see we have the national coordinator, Sergei Savchuk. I want to suggest that we submit this draft law to the ILO for the expert review, because I think that after this law is implemented, Ukraine can wholeheartedly say that we have implemented our commitments aligned with the convention. As to the this pension savings system, we support the initiative of the members of the parliament of Ukraine that that kind of system is indeed required. But this level of pension, it will make sense and will have future, and it will be implemented only if we fully understand and we fully consolidate around the understanding of why we need that. You have only 1 minute to go. It's an important day today for me because over the past 3 weeks, we have worked in our ministry to prepare a concept of how this saving system can achieve a number of points. Firstly, the human rights, the contributions to, and the payment, and as well as those social rights, exercising those social rights for the people, because investing and saving this money, that's more for the Ministry of Finance, and they're working on that. But my competence is people. People must know where their human rights are accounted for, where they're monitored, and how those people can oversee the exercise of their pension rights. And we are going to complete this work soon, and we are going to submit this concept to Ms. Tretyakova, and we will ask them to take into account our suggestions. I understand you all want to take the floor, so please do it. Yes, we value your participation today after the sleepless night, I understand. A lot depends on the policy of the Ministry of Social Policy in Ukraine. Yes, the convention is very much important. And now we can specify where Ukraine has made achievements. And the question is to Mr. Markov. What do you think about Ukraine's commitments, where we have already achieved the necessary results, where Ukraine needs support, maybe from International Labour Organization, and maybe a couple of words about the experience of the implementation of the pension reform, specifically that one related to the Tier 2. In particular related to the region where Ukraine is located. Thank you.
Дякую, Andrei. Indeed, as Guy Ryder indicated in the opening statement, and the Deputy Minister indicated, the ratification in 2016 by Ukraine of Convention 102 has represented a milestone in the how the country is engaging with the internationally established guiding principles and minimum benchmarks in social security. And this real convention has actually represented the flagship convention internationally as to regulating social security and fixing internationally established principles and minimum benchmarks. So before I go into saying a few words on the Ukrainian reform, I want to give you a nutshell, 4 elements to grasp the importance of Convention 102. The first element is that it's based on core principles and of organization and financing. So basically, regardless of how the system is, whether it's public, whether it's private, whether it's contributory, whether it's non-contributory, this convention establishes the core principles of organization and financing of social security and social protection systems. The second element is that it defines social security by reference to its very content. And here I mean the very things that are to be protected: maternity, unemployment, old age, disability, family responsibilities, and so on. And there are nine branches, which basically, when they were established, systematized by Convention 102 in the 1950s, have really been the core of what social protection and social security is about. The third element is minimum benchmarks of protection. And here we talk about here the core parameters on which protection should be organized, and they fix minimums in terms of these benchmarks, the level, the duration, and so on. The fourth element is that it places all these institutions, social security institutions, under the responsibility, the overall responsibility of the state, the general responsibility of the state. And here it is very important also when I'll come to it when we talk about transferring some of the pensions onto private schemes and regimes. So by ratifying this convention, this core international milestone convention 102, for all its 9 dimensions, for all the risks, Ukraine joined the club. It joined the club of the countries that are committed to observe this international architecture for social security, and it joined the club which protects sort of protective umbrella of this convention, because it's going to be basically the promise of good governance. It's going to be the promise of good administration. It's going to be the promise of adequate benefits throughout the covered risks. And therefore, because it is based on tested solutions, if you look at the countries that are together with Ukraine in the club of C102 Convention 102 ratifiers, we look at countries that have designed, most of them have been able to design comprehensive schemes, universal schemes, providing adequate protection throughout the contingencies. Now, does this mean that all of these countries have one and the same social security system? Of course not. And that's what makes actually Convention 102 such a beautiful piece, I would say, of legal engineering in a way. Why? Because it recognizes that what is important is the results to be achieved. And letting the countries some liberty to organize their systems as they see fit with the national context, with the national circumstances. And this is an important recognition that there is no one size fits all when we build social protection systems. So what does it say about private pension schemes and based on individual accounts? Well, interestingly, it doesn't say, and it will come as a surprise. It doesn't say much. It doesn't say this is not allowed or this is allowed, because simply for the reason that Convention 102 is not concerned whether the scheme is public or private. It is basically mainly concerned. The concern is elsewhere. It's about five things, 5 key things. It is what needs to be provided, to whom does it need to be provided? Employees, the poor, self-employed. When is the pension to be provided? The pensionable age and above. What should be the minimum level of this pension, and for how long do these benefits need to be paid? And here the answer, of course, for pension is for life. Now, in addition to these 5 elements, we have the core principles, as I was mentioning before: responsibility of the state, collective financing through contributions or taxes, periodic review of benefits and management, and participatory management of the system. So it's simple, basically. If the benefits that are provided can match this matrix with the requirements, the scheme is validated under the Convention 102. So regardless of whether it's public or private. In other words, there is no dogmatic approach here. There is rather an empirical one. So can we talk about private pension schemes based on individual account? Do they comply with these requirements set by the international social security principles and conventions? And here the answer is not really. Not really, maybe some of them, but definitely not all. So you will ask me why. And the question is, my response will be, let's go back to the basic principles and parameters. First, the responsibility of the state. Responsibility of the state here is transferred onto the individuals. When you look at private pension schemes, all the risks are taken by the individuals, and no more. The state does not assume responsibility for the amounts that the individuals have invested in these schemes. Can the rate of the benefits be guaranteed predictable level? That is a principle guaranteed by international social security law. And here the answer is no. The return on investment is dependent on market returns and not guaranteed at the end when people retire. And we've seen it in the previous 2008 crisis. People lost all their savings thanks to one crisis. Then periodic adjustment. Do we have adjustment to inflation? Someone was mentioning inflation before me. Do we have such adjustment? It's crucial. Most private pension schemes do not foresee such kind of adjustments. Those that the rare exceptions that provide for adjustment to inflation over the course of payment of pensions do it thanks to issuance of government indexed inflation indexed bonds that are basically ultimately paid by the taxpayer throughout the contingency. 1 minute left. I'm almost done. So, are the benefits paid throughout the contingency? And here again, in some cases they are, in some cases they are not. Do we have participatory management in the private pension schemes? Generally, the answer is no. So, long list here. But what I want to say is going back to the statement by Guy Ryder in his opening statement. Should we now, before, let me use a metaphor. When we are building the second floor of a house, do we try to ensure first that the foundations are solid enough before they can support the second floor of the house, or do we start building without even being able to know whether it's going to sustain? Let me use another metaphor, a motorbike. You know, everybody knows motorbikes. Do you, when you want to attach a sidecar to your motorbike, is it not a good idea first to see whether your motorbike is well functioning and is able to carry forward, or do you add the sidecar regardless, or do you try to transfer the engine of the motorbike onto the sidecar? So what is the driver here? What I'm saying is complementary pensions are complementary and they should not replace the core. And when supervisory bodies examine the core of the system, they disregard the ILO supervisory bodies disregard private pensions because they do not fit the principles, they do not fit the minimum outcomes. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, пане Марков, і особливо мені цікаво те, що ви...
Thank you very much, Mr. Markov, and I really like your idea of complementarity, that there should not be no replacement but complementarity. And we take note of your opinion that there is no size that fits all solution. We'll understand that, hope that we will have some time to discuss that later. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Tripodi. She represents the OHCHR office. What is the place of human rights in social protection, and the other way around? How the social protection of dignity of people helps to build a new pension system, and how can the UN help Ukraine implement that kind of reform? What do we need to ensure that the pensions in Ukraine not only provide decent living, but also decent, adequate living?
Thank you, Andriy, for these very pertinent questions. It's really an honor to be part of this event. Ukraine is a country that took the UN Secretary General's call to build back better seriously. And reforming the pension system is an important step towards building a better and more comprehensive social protection system. This is essential to recover from the current crisis and forge a resilient and fair society. So, how do human rights help in shaping this new pension system? The human rights framework that Ukraine has embraced can guide the content of the new pension system, but also the reform process, how the process is carried out. And as the High Commissioner stated in her video message, human rights act like a magnifying lens that identifies the weaknesses of the current pension system, identifies the multiple dimensions of discrimination inequality that social protection policies should actually address. Then human rights provide also normative and policy guidance, putting people and their well-being at the center of the reform. And at the same time, it calls for a participatory, accountable, and transparent process where people can access all information related to the reform and participate in the design of the new pension system. And in terms of content, human rights call for a universal pension system in which everyone is protected without discrimination. And this, of course, requires an improved balance between contributory and non-contributory pension schemes to ensure that everyone receives an adequate old age pension, including the most marginalized who often work in the informal economy and suffer from discrimination and have not been in a position to contribute to the social protection system. Another main objective that comes from human rights and should be part of this reform is ensuring the adequacy of benefits. As we have heard today from many speakers, the majority of pensioners in Ukraine receives old age benefits that are not enough to live in dignity. And whether in cash or in kind, benefits must be adequate in order that older people may enjoy an adequate standard of living and an adequate access to healthcare. And it would be important for the new pension system to monitor regularly the adequacy of benefits to ensure that beneficiaries are able to afford the basic goods and services. The right to social protection, which is a right in itself, requires that the direct and indirect costs associated with making contributions to the pension system must be affordable for all, and must not compromise the realization of other economic and social rights, such as the right to food, for example. So affordability is another element that should be part of the new pension system. And as the High Commissioner pointed out, it is essential that the new pension system strives to achieve gender equality, so that contributes to gender equality. The new pension system should take account of the women's unequal burden of unpaid care work, the preventing them from making equal contribution and correct this imbalance. And to make social protection really a reality for all the people in Ukraine, it is essential to dismantle all forms of discrimination, including those related to residency that impede physical access to pensions for older people living across the contact line or for IDPs. Ukraine will have to mobilize its maximum available resources, according to the Human Rights Framework, to fund the reformed pension system and make the right to social protection a reality for all of their people, including older women, IDPs, and those living in conflict-affected areas. And as the UN policy paper on social protection points out, it is essential that the resources are used efficiently by the new pension system and that achieves economic sustainability for present and future generations. Your other question, Andrew, was how can the UN support Ukraine in undertaking this reform? I think my colleague Krum has already showed how the UN could support. And I would like to add that the UN could also support Ukraine in align the envisaged reform with international human rights and labor standards, contributing to leaving no one behind. That was my first point of this panel. The UN can also facilitate the sharing of experiences and lessons learned from other countries implementing pension reforms. And moreover, the UN could support Ukraine in facilitating a broad national debate for its catalytic function and could help promote the participation of all stakeholders, including the pensioners themselves, civil society, trade unions, social movements, women's groups, to ensure Ukraine achieves the best possible reform of the pension system. And finally, I would like to stress that participation in public affairs is a fundamental human right and a cornerstone of democracy. And our office has developed guidelines for states on the effective implementation of the right to participate in public affairs, and that could be an effective tool to guide these consultations. Over to you, Andrew.
Я трошки затримався з підхопленням слова, тому що
I was a little bit delayed because I was reading a message from Krum Markov. He said that I indeed wanted to mention that the draft law that the government is working could be sent for comments. Especially in light of Ukraine's international obligations. Thank you very much. Thank you for responding. Thank you for being active. And thank you for keeping under consideration all the things that Ukrainians are striving for. Stefania mentioned people who are living on the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, who are not under the government control. And now I'd like to give the floor to Elina Shishkina, who is one of the people who are protecting the rights of those people who live on the non-governmental controlled areas, temporarily non-governmental control areas. So she is a representative of non-governmental organization, Right to Protection. Elina, that's a question for you. Besides COVID, what are some of the other obstacles, because COVID affects mobility of people and other aspects. So what are the other obstacles for Ukrainian pensioners who live on non-governmental controlled areas for them to get their pensions without any problems? Is this logistical obstacle? Is it poor legislation, the necessity to get registered somewhere, or it's public opinion, which is sometimes aggressive? Other issues. And what does your non-governmental organization do and other groups in order to help resolve the problem? Thank you, Andrei, for your question. Basically, that's a punchline, I would say, because in my presentation, I wanted to share some of the problems that people who live in the occupied territory and those who are considered to be IDPs. Answering your 30-second question, which you posted at the beginning of our discussion, I kicked off by saying that myself and the non-governmental organization that I represent, Right to Protect, the core element that has to be taken into account and has to be addressed in reforming pension system of Ukraine. So this is eradicating discrimination and dignity attitude towards people. It should not be necessarily written in legislation, regulations, and rules, but it should be revealed on practice. And we have to understand it, and we have to take it into account when we are talking about reforming the pension system. Today, I'm going to outline the problems that a rather narrow group of people face. There are quite a lot of them, but we are now talking about retirees, about people who are IDPs, and people who still reside in non-governmental controlled areas. One of the most pressing and acute issues, so this is the complicated procedure of receiving pensions. So this is access to pension. We are talking here about IDPs, pensioners, first and foremost. As of today, access of those people to their pensions is linked to the fact that they are IDPs. I mean, they have to provide a certificate saying that they are IDP. Today, using regulations and rules, so the pensioner has to provide this statement, this certificate. Unfortunately, this is the wrong approach, and it violates human rights, because this certificate or statement of the IDP does not mean that they have some special status. Such attitude and such understanding, which has been practiced for 8 years, because we've been at war for 8 years. So it's not good, because this statement only proves that this person was internally displaced, but they are not special people. They should not be treated specially. I mean, this complicated procedure, because they have harder access to their pension. If we compare, for example, pensioners who live in Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv, and are not IDPs. So first of all, what do we have to do? We have to cancel this linkage between registration and IDP status, so that they have easier access to their pension. So that's the first thing, de-linking. The second, and this is following our recommendation, we have to take into account this peculiarity. Moreover, people who are pensioners and who unfortunately, as of today, live in non-government control areas, we have to understand that given series of circumstances, these people failed to leave this non-governmental control territory. We also have to take into account that these people have mobility issues. They are seniors. They are elderly, some have health issues, and they just can't leave this territory. They might be lonely, they might have no families, and they failed to leave this non-government controlled area and move to government controlled areas. So they became prisoners of this situation. Moreover, the quarantine restrictions that were introduced last year. So first of all, they closed all this line and this checkpoints. Only 2 checkpoints are working, Stanitsa Luhanska in Luhansk and 1 checkpoint in Donetsk region. And there is limited access to them and the limited capacity through these checkpoints. And some people who live on non-government controlled areas have failed to cross this border, this crossing point, this checkpoint, and get their pension in government controlled areas. So back to my initial statement. When we are developing this pension reform, we have to take into account the quarantine restrictions, and we have to take into account people who are residing in non-government controlled areas, because they have the right to their pension, because pension is their ownership, and the government, according to its constitution, has to do everything so that these people get their pensions without any discrimination and any obstruction. So the access to the pension of those people has to be based on the same principles as the access of any pensioner residing anywhere in Ukraine. Another issue, which is of paramount importance, probably it doesn't relate directly to reforming the pension system, but it relates to pension itself, and it's very sensitive for many people. We are talking about the debts and about people who don't get their pension due to certain reasons. And also there are lawsuits that the government did not meet. Some pensioners pressed charges against the country of Ukraine, and they wanted their pension to be paid back to them. Some verdicts were in favor of the claimants, but not all of them. Every year, the government has little sum of money in the national budget in order to pay back the pensions according to the lawsuits. This year, the budget was approved in the first reading, and unfortunately this program was totally excluded from the budget during the first reading. As far as I remember, 200,000 hryvnias was included into the second version of the budget, but 200,000 is minuscule sum of money when we take into account all the lawsuits where Ukraine as the country lost to the claimants, and the debts that Ukraine as a country has towards people starting from 2018 is more than 1 billion hryvnias. Even if 200,000 hryvnias is now included into the budget, it doesn't address the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. It's far from enough. So the government fails to meet its commitments and return the pensions following the charges. So when we are talking about reforms of the pension system, this aspect has to be taken into account. It's very important. Maybe it's not directly related to the gist of the pension reform, but it is very important to people who depend on this pension and for who pension is the only source of income. You've got 1 minute left. I'm almost there. I'm almost done. The last thing I wanted to mention is that one of the possibilities how we can resolve the situation is alternative ways of verification of non-mobile people with mobility problems who reside in non-government controlled territories. As of today, at least in our non-governmental organization, we know that the government authorities have political will to address these issues. So the Ministry of Reintegration, the Ministry of Social Policy, the Committee of the Social Policy of Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. So there is political will to resolve these problems, and our non-governmental organization hopes that this political will be dynamic and it will arrive at solutions, positive solutions that will contribute to meeting their constitutional commitments of the government of Ukraine to the people of Ukraine. I mean, first of all, these are IDPs and people who reside in non-government controlled areas and have no access to their pension. So we have to eliminate this complicated procedure, this discrimination that is now in our rules and regulations, and allow people to feel dignified, feel that the government respects their dignity and the right to have dignified old age life. This is probably the second time that people refer to the Constitution of Ukraine. Today, Ms. Lazebna also did that. So we have to remember that Constitution is, of course, important, but it's also the system that creates certain problems. So thank you for drawing your attention to this. Let me remind you that you have a chance to ask your questions to the participants of this discussion. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Alexander Shubin. If you have any questions, so feel free to ask them in our common chat, and we will also announce the questions that were posted in social networks. So Alexander, over to you. Thank you, Andriy. For myself and majority of the participants of today's event, so this question is personal. I don't want to talk about some formalities, but just share my reflections and my thoughts, and maybe ask the dignified audience about their opinion. Recently, I was dealing with some biographical documents, and I noticed that my qualifying minimum insurance period is more than 20 years. I understand that pension is not over the hills, and I have to plan it. I was born and grew up in Donetsk. My parents are IDPs, and a lot of my families and a lot of my friends and family members, they have seniors in their families who failed to leave this occupied territory. And that's why this pension thing, access to pension, all those obstacles they have to go through, all those problems they are facing. So it really hurts, because these are living people and they have the right to get their pension. So, and I see it as a tragedy. In my life, I have spent most of my career years working for the government. We were paying social security tax, and also the pension of public servants had to be higher than the pension of ordinary people, because we were paying more taxes. But the reform was implemented, a few years passed, and public officials lost their right to get higher pensions. And now we are getting back to getting fair treatment again. So there was another reform that was implemented recently, and the coefficient was changed, and people are now counting on lower level of pension coverage than they used to cover when they were employed. Recently, our media publishing some estimates of the journalists. They noticed this process. I'm not quoting, I'm just trying to reflect the thoughts of the society, is that there should be a focus on pay-as-you-go pension system, and now it is seen as a threat for stability in the future. I think that it all means, I'm quoting Confucius, it's not good to live in the time of changes, but unfortunately Ukraine lives in the time of changes all the time. We have great burden of demographic problem, the rise of migration, the budget doesn't have enough money for social coverage, and of course it all causes problems in social security system. Politicians recently started talking about possible ways out of this situation. This is to introduce the second level of reform. That's right. We were even going to launch the third level of pension reform, which is voluntary, in order to involve private pension funds and later use the best of those private pension funds that will make the foundation of the second level of pension coverage. People will be trusting contributory pension system, and they will be more positive to this issue. But unfortunately, that was in theory. In practice, things went differently, and the third level was never implemented. When we were having discussions in trade union society and we were talking about the implementation of the second level, we heard a lot of stories from the participants of the third level, from the participants of the pension programs of Ukrainian banks, and unfortunately these were not success stories. These were negative stories because people didn't get the pension that they were contributing to during their life when they were paying to those pension funds or banks. Getting ready to today's event, I decided to visit the website of Oschad Bank of Ukraine, and I just wanted to figure out what are the interest rates. 7.7, that's the highest. And given the fact that for 3 months, we have been enjoying inflation of over 4% in Ukraine. The rate of inflation last year, not last year, but in 2018, so the highest inflation was 9.2%. So which means that the pension deposits of Oschad Bank cannot even cover the pace of inflation that we have this year. If we look at the domestic government loan bonds rates, which are the most protected securities, it's 8.5%, not enough either. So the question remains, of course, we can build a wonderful system, but where are we going to invest money so that people should not get back to the same thing in 20 years or 30 years time and reiterate the same statements? If the government takes the commitment to transfer the money in a centralized manner, does it have the guts to take the commitments to protect those funds against con men? Because we know about the pyramids like MMM and others that were in Ukrainian reality. They still are present in Ukrainian society. There are lots of con men who want to make their money on naive citizens, and therefore the issue of trust is the key issue in the pension system reform.
I want to say that certainly when you criticize, you need to give proposals. And there is a number of issues to discuss. I mean, the programs to launch the economy to a good start, because unfortunately we failed to create many good programs for the development of the industry, energy sector, those sectors that could create a lot of jobs. we are discussing whether we need certain laws focused on making the informal sectors into formal sectors. We have failed to introduce the progressive taxation system, and people who get millions in revenues, they pay the taxes as if they were getting not millions, but several thousands of hryvnias, which is not fair. And I think that building a fair system of taxation on revenues is the best way to be successful with pension system. And before we start talking about reform of the social protection and pensions in Ukraine, which unfortunately which remain in fact comprehensive in Ukraine, but we have not succeeded in changing that by thinking where we can make more money rather than where we can cut more costs. Because that can be sometimes discriminatory for the people who have worked for their entire life and deserve those pensions. Those so many examples that our previous speakers have provided, I can add to the metaphor that indeed we have a sick individual if we talk about our pension system. We all understand that to be able to stay in good health, we need to do sports, but you can't be successful with by putting a person to a black lane on skis if he never skied at all in his life. We need to lay new foundations to put new walls. That would be our contributory system. And then when we have this ground laid, then can we talk about the other levels that are obviously necessary. And the last point, as to the IDPs and the people who unfortunately have to stay on the occupied territories, this is indeed a tragedy, and the government must take every effort to support those people. We can't even imagine those conditions under which those people have to live. Thank you. Thank you. We are having now responses, comments, or what Mr. Shubin has just said. In particular, Ms. Gumenuk says increased insurance contributions of public officials started back in 2011 until 2016. So it was only 5 to 6 years, while the pensions were calculated for them since 1993. That's really the question about the principle of fairness. Another person in the chat says, it's interesting when this certain procedure determined by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine will be adopted. The current mechanism of pensions payments to the IDPs requires that the payments of pensions until the moment of recovery are going to be freezed. Maybe someone can respond to that. Maybe Marina Shishkina. Marina Shishkina or Ms. Lazebna. It was Mr. Vladimir Vinogradov from Civil Society Organization, Northern Human Rights Defense Group. Ms. Irina Kumenyuk says the pensions within the solidarity system, the state contributory system, do not belong to the property right. Well, we can comment on the statements of our participants, but before we do that, I want to ask you question number 2. Guy Ryder, and not only him, he mentioned non-traditional employment types. So what is being done in Ukraine about that? Question 2, Mr. Shubin, whether your federation tries to cover those kind of people, or maybe other participants wants to add some questions or comments. Alexander, if I understand you correctly, you mean the IDPs, right? What kind of category that the federation must cover? Well, the question is whether the people who are employed on different modern platforms come to you. Do you try to take into account their views? Because I remember there was a conference last year, and the trade unions talked about that. Yes, over the past 2 or 3 years, when the share of this platform economy increased and the COVID really led to a boom of these platforms. I mean, the number of courier delivery services, their revenues increased twice or 3 times during the pandemic. So we started preparing special programs based on certain trade unions who deal with small-sized and mid-sized businesses, in particular the trade union of producers and entrepreneurs. And we are preparing proposals on that. We started to cooperate with activists who want to create those trade unions and that kind of platform companies. For instance, there was this initiative to create a trade union in Glovo. And we cooperate with those activists and we involve them into the trade unions within the federation. Now, also, with our international partners, we are now working to ensure that those employees get legislative protection. I mean, the right to association, right to assembly, the right to be part of a trade union. There is a draft law registered about non-standard employment types. It has been registered with the Verkhovna Rada. And at the end of the last year, we had a special conference dedicated to the Employment Day, and we gathered the employers and scholars who deal with this issue. And there is a number of other legislative initiatives being prepared that will cover the people who are freelancers or work on the platform economy arrangements. So we are indeed trying to cover them, those breakthrough sectors. Yes, thank you for the floor. I want to respond to the comments in the chat. To the first question of Mr. Vinogradov, maybe this question needs to be asked to the government authorities, because our charitable foundation is not a government institution, so probably the government should respond, because we want this answer too. As to your second comment, as to the pensions within this state contributory system, solidarity system, I agree that this is a matter of discussion, a debatable issue. I like the European, the case law of the European Court of Human Rights that addresses the issue of the property. And I want to remind everyone listening to us that there is a pilot decision of the European Court of Human Rights approved in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, and this court stated that there is a systematic problem in Ukraine of non-payment of pensions. And the court judged that the pension needs to be paid to the claimant. Ukraine failed to observe that, and the European Court stated that this is a systematic problem. It confirmed that the pension is a property of an individual, and the court also stated that the failure to pay the pension is a violation of the right to fair trial. In that judgment and other judgments of the European Court, following this pilot decision, they also stated the violation not only of the Article 6 on the fair trial right, but the right to property within the Protocol 1 in the context of pensions. So for myself and for the organization, well, we like this approach of the European Court of Human Rights. According to the Article 17 of the law of Ukraine on the implementation of the judgments of European courts, the judgments of the European Court are the sources of law in Ukraine, and that's why Ukrainian courts must be guided by those judgments when they hear those cases. And for me, we will probably need to adopt this very approach. Well, yes, we have the discussion, and that's why we discuss debatable issues. Thank you for your contribution. And now a comment about the IDPs and respect to human rights. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andriy. Yes, I just wanted to remind what human rights say on this issue. Basically, Ukraine is part of the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, has ratified the covenant that includes the right to social protection. And there is a body, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that monitors the implementation of the covenant, but has also an authoritative function to interpret the content of those rights. And in interpreting the content of the right to social protection, it's General Comment 19, it has clearly stated that the need to register as IDPs should be waived. And the place of residency should never be an obstacle for IDPs to receive their pensions. So I think that would help into, for example, approving the law that is already been drafted, and in going towards this direction, in removing the obstacles for IDPs to receive their pension.
Thank you, Stefania. Krum is next, але до того, як почне говорити Krum Markov.
Thank you. Mr. Markov wants to say something, but before I give him the floor, I want to give the floor to other speakers. You have not more than a minute to speak up if you want.
Krum, go ahead. I see your raised hand.
Let me...
Гаразд, пане Марк, то тоді...
Дякую, Andrei. And just to complement, I had just two small points. First one regarding the discussion on whether the pensions from there was a right to property under the solidarity pay-as-you-go mechanism. And here, more than the right to property, basically what we have there is the basis of the social contract under the responsibility of the state to operate it. And what we see there is that there is no there is a right, that is what is the heart at the heart of the rights-based approach to social protection, basically, that when you have a right that is defined by law, that is predictable as regards the level of the right, the state has to guarantee what is there. Calling it a right to property of the funds usually is not how we refer to it, because there is no in pay-as-you-go schemes, there is no fixed amount of money waiting for you that is your property. Rather, we prefer to refer to it as the responsibility of the state to guarantee a right that is there. And the other point I wanted to make was with regard to the new forms of work, atypical forms of work, non-standard forms of work that are proliferating. And my colleagues based in Ukraine we were discussing this, and they were informing me that according to a recent 2018 report, Ukraine is in the first place of Europe as regards platform work, and in the fourth rank in the world for the spread of platform work. Now, how do we cover these workers worldwide? And basically, what you see there is a gray zone. Because why? Because it was simply made very much part of the business model of platforms to avoid the spending on social protection for these workers, and sometimes even avoid the labor dimensions, the labor rights, the labor law. What we are seeing is that now, of course, with the number of workers proliferating, with the numbers of hardships proliferating, there is a growing realization that these are workers still, that they work for platforms, but through platforms, but most of them are workers. Jurisdictions are requalifying their employment relationships into employment relationship and them as employees worldwide. This is the growing trend. And in many cases, there has started the process of adapting the social protection mechanisms that are going to be applicable to them, so that to take into account the specificity of the platform work. But you have many examples where, for example, France is. The platforms are liable for the accident insurance fees. They have to report the activities to the tax authorities, so that there is also a sound check in terms of the tax authorities, what is happening. You have many countries which have started introducing a flat tax on platform work, which covers also platform workers, and this tax would cover both social security contributions and fiscal and tax contributions that are required. You have many such mechanisms, embryonic and starting to operate worldwide. But what is key is that you see a trend towards labor law and social protection law reinvesting this area, which was born as outside the scope of both labor and social security law, and you see these two dimensions now catching up.
Thank you, Krum. I was busy listening simultaneously. Я слухав Крума і одночасно ще...
I was listening to you and was at the same time trying to put everyone into line for everyone who wanted to take the floor. I want to sum up, but two people will definitely have the floor. Irina Husic, who wants to talk about the guarantees. Actually, this the question that I meant to ask, but I didn't. And then Ms. Lazebna will take the floor. Irina, please, the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you for the organization of this event. I represent a civil society organization that helps to thousands of Ukrainian migrants to have registration for their pensions. I mean, those migrants who live in Italy specifically. the policy paper of UN gave a special space for the migrants, and that's very good because the migrants need to remain in focus so that their rights to pension can be observed. And not, as Ms. Shishkina says, to complicate the regulation for them.
Право на соціальний захист покращувалося і
Our
спрощувалося.
organization is trying to simplify the rights for the social security. Last year in December, we organized an event together with the Institute for Strategic Research and Cerberus Strategic Center, and I'm grateful for this quality event and the recommendations that were submitted to the government. I want to make a very short statement. What is important for labor migrants, or so this is the agreement on social security where our labor migrants work, and the mechanisms of implementation of social standards should be improved. We are working most actively with migrants to Italy. There is no such agreement, and the right for social protection and security is organized on the non-governmental level thanks to our organization, but we have to keep this country in the focus of our attention, since migrants in Italy, majority of them, these are people who are considered to be seniors, and we see on daily basis that it's not easy. If there is no intergovernmental agreement, it's difficult to get your rights for social security. Every year you have to go through hell in order to get all the statements, certificates, and eventually get your pension at home. And I believe that this is very important issue, and we have to activate our dialogue, especially with countries where there is no agreement on the issue of social security. Thank you very much to those who are contributing to this analytical work, and I'm grateful to Olena from the Institute of Strategic Research, who is very active in this sphere. Thank you very much. Thank you, Irino, for drawing attention to this very important issue. And now the floor is over to the Ministry of Social Policy. Unfortunately, Ms. Minister has left, but let me take over. I'd like to answer a few questions that were raised, and I'd like to talk about the position of our ministry. What Yarina mentioned, Yarina Homtsi, she talked about the labor migrants from Italy. I want to say that our pension legislation provides for all the opportunities to be part of pension system. Yarina was right that the biggest problem is bilateral agreements between countries. This is something we are working on at the moment. But the main problem is that there has to be a goodwill of the other side in order to conclude this agreement, because without such agreement, we cannot regulate all the other related issues. Speaking of the coverage of migrants by the legislation of Ukraine, these issues are regulated from our side. So a person can take part in voluntary social security program. Speaking of the second issue, we had quite fruitful discussion about informal employment and this platform economy, like alternative, I would say, forms of employment. This issue is also something that we are working on right now in terms of legislation, regulation. Recently, the Parliament of Ukraine enacted the law that provides for the remote or distant or teleworking. It has been regulated. Of course, other issues remain to be regulated, but there are quite a few aspects that need addressing. If your employment is informal, unofficial, then you can join voluntary pension plan, pension system. This is a two-way street. On one side, there is the government of Ukraine that has to cover the new types of employment. On the other side, on the opposite lane, people have to be interested in being covered by social security, in particular pension. The next issue, it's more theoretical, whether pension is the property, ownership property of people or not. According to the findings of the European Court on Human Rights, this question is theoretical, but it's of paramount importance. According to our effective legislation, pension is a special product. It becomes the ownership of a person once the person receives it. It's a very specific regulation. It has its own pros and cons and peculiarities, but irrespective of this fact, the government guarantees the pension to the person and it takes the commitment to pay this pension. And here we come back to the question of paying pensions to IDPs, people who live in non-government controlled areas. It's not about ownership and it's not about property, whether the pension is your property. It's the issue of possibility to pay it to the person, because people who are in non-government controlled areas, the government cannot pay the pensions because they cannot guarantee that this pension will arrive at the hands of this person. And this is probably the biggest challenge that we are facing right now. Therefore, over the past few years, the payment of pensions to IDPs has been transformed. There was another issue that was raised earlier. So that was the certificate, the status of IDP statement or certificate or whatever. So these people were had to produce this certificate in the past, but today, this statement does not include any status. It has a totally different role as of today. It says, it mentions the address at which the person receives pension and other social benefits, since pensions and social benefits are paid at the address. And if the person, for example, temporarily resides in Lviv or in Kyiv, or just resides in Kyiv and Lviv, so they are registered and there are no issues here. So IDPs in this situation, they don't have the permanent address. Therefore, this statement says where the person can get all the social payments. So basically the gist of this statement has changed recently. There was another issue that was paying the debts to the pensioners, and we are in progress, so in the pipeline, and the regulations have been developed. It will be approved by the ministry soon, and according to the procedure, once it is approved, it will be submitted for the approval to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. Thank you very much. It's a very important psychological moment. The Ministry of Social Policy could be absolutely confident that they will be given the floor, and they got the floor because they are one of the core participants of this event. But they decided to ask for the floor themselves, so they were not waiting before they will be invited. And it means that they are really involved and they are active, and we are grateful for your active contribution to this event, and we are grateful for your work that you have done, are doing, and will be doing. So we are moving towards the conclusions. Victoria, could you check whether Halina Tretyakova is with us? I think that she failed to join us because she was invited to take part in the committee meeting of the Verkhovna Rada committee. That's why she apologizes. She couldn't be with us. Drawing conclusions, I'd like you to remember Krum Markov's words. by signing the covenant, Ukraine joined the club. But joining the club means that you have to pay membership fee. So, drawing conclusion, I'd like you to say, is Ukraine paying its membership fee? And does Ukraine believe that the system is a burden, or this system can be beneficial? So maybe Krum Marko will start. 1 minute.
Дякую, Andrei. Indeed. So now it's the first test in a way for Ukraine now as a member of the club to do the significant reform. And let me locate where Ukraine stands. If we look at the world, you have 90% of the countries which only have defined benefit pay-as-you-go system. You have 15% of the countries globally that have a mixed system with some pay-as-you-go, some second pillar individual accounts. And you have only 7% of the countries where the pensions are totally into individual accounts, pillar based. So basically, we are now talking about something that is not the mainstream, right? We are talking about building some component of the system which is to have very strong consequences on the system itself. And we better fix what is wrong with the main part, with the motor of the system, which should be the pay-as-you-go part, before we embark on complementing the system with these additional. Also because these additional elements they cannot fit with the framework, with the architectural framework that Convention 102 principles provide. So this is, and again, I want to raise the offer to the ministry to engage with us in terms of transmitting the draft legislation that they are working on, so that we can also provide some insights based on Ukraine's obligations under Convention 102.
Thank you very much, Krum. І прошу до висновків Еліну Шишкіну, будь ласка.
Thank you very much, Krum. And now Elina Shishkina, the floor is yours. Thank you. Andrei, you were absolutely right that becoming the member of the club means you have to pay a membership fee. Membership fee, this is commitments of the government. When we are talking about the pension reform and the change of the pension system, we have to understand that in the focus of this reform, there has to be a person, a human being, who is entitled to the pension according to the Constitution of Ukraine, Article 46. And the government on its side has the commitment, constitutional commitment, to pay the pension timely and in quality fashion, quality manner, and create all the opportunities so that not only a person can get the pension, but this pension can provide the dignity, level of life, which is also guaranteed by the Constitution of Ukraine, and create the opportunities so that the person can get the pension without any discrimination and any obstacles. This is the commitment of the government of the state. Talking about the pension reform, we have to understand that this is a two-way movement. The person was working all their life, they deserve the pension, and the government is committed to pay the pension and create the opportunities so that the pension arrives at the address where the person resides, or irrespective where a person resides, whether it is Lviv or in Horlivka, which is occupied, or it is Avdiivka or Marlivka or any other region, or this person is an IDP. So this is the philosophy. It has to be human-centered philosophy, the right to the dignity pension in the old age. Today's discussion demonstrated political will of the government to address these issues, and we see already the first steps that have been implemented. These positive steps can only be we can only be grateful for these positive steps, and I hope that the government is going to continue their work, and soon, maybe not today, but we will get the positive result we count on, and people will get their dignity pension. Thank you very much, Elina, and especially mentioning this political will issue. I have always been wondering, why do we always lack this political will? Should anything go wrong in Ukraine, they always blame the political will. and following the constitution of Ukraine. This is another commitment of the state. Stefania Tripodi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andriy. I think that the fact that Ukraine is embarking in this reform, it shows the openness in putting into discussion the entire pension system. And I think that the human rights commitment that Ukraine has taken can guide Ukraine in really achieving the best possible reform that really works for their people. And to use these commitments to embark in a national dialogue, in a debate that today was one of those steps that could really lead to use all the talents, the experiences and the expertise of people in Ukraine to come up with the best possible reform that work for Ukrainian people.
Thank you, Stefania. Thank you very much. Alexander Shubin.
Thank you, Stefania. And Alexander Shubin will be the last, so he will conclude the conclusions. Dear colleagues, today we talked about the constitution, we referred to the constitution. According to the constitution of Ukraine, Ukraine is a social country. Ukraine is the country that is striving for Euro-Atlantic integration, and these are the highest standards in the world of the social state with the system of universal social coverage. This is a great responsibility on the shoulders of our country and on the shoulders of the institutions and people who work in the institutions to meet the commitments and to provide their rights to and guarantees to all categories of people, children, employed, and pensioners. And this commitment provides for great work. So every step that is done by the government and meeting the highest standards of the International Labour Organization and United Nations organizations that are building the solid platform. We, as a social partners of the government, are ready to offer our supporting shoulder and be involved in all discussions and work that will ensure the highest, meeting the highest standards. We have to follow this model of behavior, and we have to fight, and we will succeed. Thank you, Alexander. The Ministry of Social Policy still wants to say something. If there is anything else you want to say, so you are given the chance to do so. We are grateful for organization of this event and for this two-way movement. We have international partners, we have non-governmental organizations, civil society organization. So this is really important to share the information and to discuss things. Especially, we are in close contact with International Labour Organization, and we are grateful for the offers that you have sent to us for consideration. We definitely will continue close cooperation with you. Our major goal is to build maximum inclusive and the pension system that covers all, that would provide a dignity level of life not lower than a subsistence level, which is calculated in the just and fair manner. And I'm absolutely confident that our today's meeting has to exert to join all the efforts so that the social security is just and fair and square for the future generations. And Ukraine is the country where we want to live and we want to stay. Thank you. Thank you. Elena Shishkina is just trying to say that their charity foundation is also ready to be involved in all discussions regarding pension reform. And me as a moderator, concluding, I would like to say that the most important result is that during the discussion, it's possible to even make agreements and arrangements, to make arrangements to be involved in the discussion, knowing people who are taking certain commitments. I'm absolutely positive that this movement is going to be a two-way movement. There is going to be fruitful cooperation, but given into account the complexity of the situation, we will have to exert every effort in order to achieve success. We've heard a lot of interesting thoughts. we got food for thought, I'd say. We even got some assessments and some information about the current status, what are their challenges and what are the prospects for the future. So I'm sure that we will all go home and take away some of the things for further consideration. Before I move on to the person who is the coordinator, UN resident coordinator in Ukraine, Osnat Lubrani, who actually set the pace of our today's work and created this favorable atmosphere for our work, I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants of today's event. Especially, I'd like to express my gratitude to our interpreters, Miroslava and Serhiy. I've been listening to interpretation from time to time because I love listening to quality simultaneous interpretation. And because I was a moderator, I couldn't listen more, but thank you very much for your great job. And Osnat Lubrani, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andrei, and let me also say a big thanks to you for fantastic moderation. So we had really fantastic interpreters and fantastic moderation, which is, I think, made this discussion so interactive and so useful. Let me say a big thanks to all of you who participated. I really want to acknowledge also the presence and the involvement and the political will expressed by the Ministry of Social Affairs, and to say that it's not easy on the ministry either. I mean, in some ways, we should have also had here the Ministry of Finance and maybe some other ministry. So we all need to be supportive of that as well, and working with the colleagues in civil society, parliament, everywhere. But I do want to I think that the paper that we have presented, that we gave you as a source of inspiration, has already spurred a good debate and good constructive discussion on pension reform. I want to thank Minister Lazebna and also all of the others for offering to share the draft with the UN. I think that we and all of the colleagues here would be good sources to serve as a sounding board on that draft. But as was mentioned by Elena, you know, some of the solutions are not only legal, some of them can be done through simplifying of administrative procedures, such as for the population living across the contact line in the conflict affected areas. And then it was so good that there was discussion looking at specific groups, like, you know, the special challenges of IDPs, of migrants, of women. Now, for us, we don't want to put our paper on a shelf now. We want to use it as a benchmark and a baseline, and perhaps revisit it in 6 to 12 months' time and see, okay, where are we? But I would encourage all the state bodies, the analytic, the academic institutions, civil society, to continue this debate, looking at our recommendations and contributing further. And just to mention that we will be having more such a policy paper on you know, complicated, complex issues, such as one coming up is on population dynamics, and there will be also on other issues as well. And so finally, to close, I wanted to invite you to listen to Maximiliano Santa Cruz, the grandchild of Hernan Santa Cruz, who is one of the initial drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And human rights really permeated our discussion, and it's really at the core of all of the UN's work, certainly on social protection and on pension reform. Very important to have this discussion within this series. So with that, thank you again all, and over to Maximiliano.
Hello. It is my privilege to send you warm greetings on behalf of the family of Hernan Santa Cruz, my late grandfather. Our family, Santiago Celli, is deeply touched by the initiative of the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to honor him through this dialogue series. Following the successful launch of the series in Sudan, we are pleased to see this journey proceed today in Ukraine. I congratulate the organizers for selecting the very pertinent theme of social protection for today's discussion. The Hernan Santa Cruz Dialogue aims to raise awareness and stimulate discussions to advance the realization of socioeconomic rights in national settings, to make economic, social, and cultural rights, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the rights to development a reality for all. It aims to redress the imbalance in the understanding of human rights as universal, indivisible, and interdependent, reclaiming the vision of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a heartfelt mission of Hernan Santa Cruz, and many others. We hope that socioeconomic rights will thereby assume a higher threshold in policy and practice, making a difference on the ground. Building solidarity, cooperation, and partnership at all levels will be a key to the success. Human rights are key to breaking the cycles of inequality and conflict. My grandfather maintained that all states had an obligation to respect all human rights, irrespective of their forms of government or economic systems. His engagement in the creation of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, and the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, as well as putting development at the center of discussions in the UN, also helped me serve the noble cause of peace, human rights, and development, pillars of the United Nations. The mission of Hernan Santa Cruz was one that united all humanity in a spirit of solidarity, one that saw all human beings as equals in dignity and rights. His mission to advance better standards of life with larger freedom is ever more significant for the people of Ukraine, as for people everywhere. As peace building remains an important challenge in this time of transition, addressing the root causes of conflict, including violations of economic, social, and cultural rights, will serve to sustain peace. I am truly honored to join the event in Ukraine, which, despite many challenges, has a vibrant belief in change. I hope that today's event will help empower communities to become agents of change and claim their human rights. I thank the UN country team in Ukraine and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and her office for enabling this dialogue. Socioeconomic rights are a pathway to peace. They pave the way to stability and well-being for all. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую за вашу увагу.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention. I suggest that we conclude our event today. I want to thank all of our partners, guests, colleagues, representatives of the government, civil society organizations for finding time to join us to listen to our presentation. Thank you very much, our guests today, in particular Andrei, for moderating our discussion. The text of the policy paper will be published on our official website, ukraine.un.org. Feel free to access it. Thank you very much and see you later. So long.